The female intuition, which women actually have better developed than men, is actually the ability to read emotional states and navigate in the nonverbal hints that each man sends in conversation, nonverbal hints, that is. All the information that can be picked up beyond words, i.e. the color of your voice, the speed with which you speak, the gestures that you perform during speech, the emotions that you feel during that time, and also the inconsistency between what you say and how you behave. Based on these tips, women are able to see if what you say is consistent with what you do. This is a very useful skill for women, which they have been endowed with by nature because it allows them to figure out which male represents the characteristics of a strong male, i.e., an alpha male. Although it is very useful, it is nothing more than a skill that you can learn as a man. This is one of the skills on which pickup artists are based. They know the mechanisms of a woman decoding information in the context of a male-female relationship, and they teach men how to talk to women to a certain effect. If you know how to formulate sentences and how to behave during a conversation, the female brain, or more precisely the primal brain, the primary part of the mind that is very difficult to control without being aware of its existence and functioning, will think of you as an alpha male. Therefore, it is worth knowing about it and getting into the subject. How does the female intuition work? It is best to present it with a simple example. Suppose you're telling the story that you think Rhodes or Crete is a more beautiful Greek island, but you do it into different ways. First, Rhodes is more beautiful. It's closer to Turkey. Cities are very similar to each other, as Greek as that on the island. I liked Crete less, but it was so big. The ancient ruins of Knossos were cool, I can't say, but they didn't collapse, and now the second one. Rhodes is a beautiful island, although it is smaller. Its landscape is much more beautiful. The city of Rhodes has a beautiful old town, full of picturesque streets that look completely different from any street. You can feel the influences of different Greek and Turkish cultures. The mighty stone wall, which surrounds the city from the outside, gives the city unimaginable majesty and power. From the city walls in the east direction, you can see the coast of Turkey. It's a beautiful view at sunset. Although Rhodes and Crete are islands and both lie in the Mediterranean, they're completely different. On the opposite end of the island lies the famous beach Paris-Onisi, a dream for surfers and kite surfers. Hundreds of sailing, windsurfing, and kitesurfing make an amazing impression when they walk side by side in a crazy dance. Yes, Rhodes is a beautiful island. Which description sounds better? Which was more interesting? All of this, apart from the proper selection of words, is nonverbal communication, on the basis of which you can make conclusions, and women do it very easily, but it's just a skill. It can be learned just like writing or painting. It has nothing to do with supernatural abilities. Simply nature has given women a different innate set of skills, more useful in interpersonal abilities than men. Suppose you say a few sentences in a similar way at a meeting. It's first of all to attract a woman, cause that's the kind of story it's attracting. Secondly, she be sure you've been there because the way you told me about the island suggests that you know what you're talking about. Because women define emotions differently, and they find it harder to control them, therefore, they think that a story that will be colored this way will be more likely. You need to know that women process language differently than men. They recognize it differently. A single sentence, even if it fits the taste of a woman, she will want to verify by asking auxiliary questions which are intended to determine whether you really know what you're talking about, that is, you don't cheat, and whether, at a deeper level, you are consistent with what you are saying. The consistency of your attitude is meant to help verify that you are who you are. That's what shit tests are for. An example of such verification can be the following sentence sequence. The example is modified so you can understand the analogy. I present myself as a supercomputer scientist and tell you how many of these great lines of code I wrote in applications for giants in Silicon Valley, and then I assume that I installed the operating system in the BIOS. If I'm not an Einstein of computer science and I haven't made any scientific breakthroughs in this field, then you've just noticed the inaccuracies because the operating system doesn't install in the BIOS. Such a statement basically disqualifies me as a supercomputer scientist. If you didn't believe what you heard, you could ask, and what was the BIOS capacity? How much did the system weigh? If I said that the BIOS had 30 megabytes and the system 10 gigabytes, I would solve any doubts about my IT skills. Such a question would be a shit test that a woman would use if she was interested in computer science. To make sure I'm a complete ignorant, not a supercomputer, it was just a linguistic example. But if you add nonverbal language, that is, information not expressed in words but in deeds, then you can imagine how much information you will suddenly get. That's what's supposed to be a female intuition. Suppose you've done something your wife doesn't praise or even forbade you. For example, you bought a new Xbox because you like to play in the NBA, but you don't want to say it outright because you know you're going to be treated with silence. Silence so you can reflect on your mistakes and make you feel guilty for fulfilling your desire. Sounds familiar. It's a woman who can, for example, ask a question from unwillingness, "Why don't you have time for me lately?" If you answer straight, you have already lost on the first question. If you come up with some answer while waiting, but it will not be convincing or will argue with your current lifestyle, then the woman does not yet know what is wrong, but already knows that something is. And only then will she start to stir up with further questions. And once you admit that you bought a new console, you'll probably hear, "Aha, I knew you were shooting something. I felt it, my intuition never let me down." It's not a mystical power. It's the ability to read nonverbal messages. You can learn that too, which I encourage you to do. If you want, I suggest a small experiment. When you have the opportunity, that is, when you feel that a question or series of questions has a second bottom, and you realize that it is, because most often a series of seemingly different questions is followed in succession but still aimed at one specific goal. For example, if a woman wants to spend time with you, she asks what you're doing in the evening. Or it suggests there's a premiere of some new movie or series. In the case that you watch it together and you answer that you do not have time, that you are not in the mood for a movie today, and in addition you smile, you will very quickly find out that the female intuition flies like a soap bubble because a smile has this property that very effectively allows you to hide emotions. And if you don't give a straightforward answer and mask your nervousness with a smile, it'll become like a baby in the fog, and then she start asking questions with multiplied force because she won't know what's going on, and worse, she can't read the rest of the communication. Women really don't like not knowing. I'm sure you've noticed many times that when you ask an uncomfortable question, often the first reaction is a loud laugh, but there's something weird about it. He wasn't so natural, he was more forced. If you had that impression, you felt very well. Because it was a classic catch to distract, to mask emotions. It is very often used by manipulators, and therefore manipulators very quickly realize that they themselves are being manipulated, and that, on average, women are much better manipulators than men. I don't think I need to convince you. The second element, which consists of female intuition, is nothing but a richer experience. That is, there is a high probability that out of two average peers, say 20 years old, the woman has more experience in interpersonal relationships, has been in more relationships or temporary acquaintances or even romance, has had more opportunities to flirt, has heard more similar or even similar texts from men, and already knows what is behind them. It's like you bought a new Call of Duty, entered the server for the first time on a completely unknown map in multiplayer mode, and wondered that some pro player or even someone who just knows the map will play you as they want without the slightest problems. As you gain experience, you will realize that certain responses, behaviors, or plays occur in specific situations and have very specific consequences, but to know that, you have to get the practice yourself or find someone who already has the practice and can tell you what it is. Think about it for a second. If using a computer analogy, you would be a pro player, and for the last 5 years, you would hear every moment that you are a super player. Then after how long it would become boring and your reaction would be nothing but simple boredom and maybe thrown unwillingly, I know. And if, in addition, someone after such praise you a moment later would want you to devote 2 hours of your time to him and explain to him the secrets of your game, then when he learns that you are a super great pro player, it takes you a lot of time during the day. And the same is true of women who hear it several times a day. Hey, beautiful, and everyone wants exactly the same from them. At first, it is great, but soon everyone will realize the principles of such a compliment and that nothing is for free. This is exactly what we call experience. In the episode about SMV, I explained that at the beginning of her journey, a woman is much more successful than a man, so she must also have more opportunities to interact, and therefore she has more experience. Sometimes relentlessly greater, which in the future will prove to be a problem for a woman, but about that in another episode. The ability to read more nonverbal hints and the greater ability to use language, combined with greater knowledge of what lies behind specific texts, means that women are able, on average, to grasp the true intentions of their interlocutors much faster. The ability to read nonverbal language is needed by women for 2 reasons. Firstly, in order to better understand the language of the body and the behavior of offspring, and in the case of biological and evolutionary partner selection, the investment of a woman in maternity is much greater than that of a man. First of all, her body during the first months is further burdened by being pregnant. This also involves potentially major problems, which in modern times have largely been eliminated by medicine. Nevertheless, the mechanism remains. The second important function of this intuition is the selection of the partner. Isn't it by chance that he pretends to have qualities that, from an evolutionary point of view, could or had been a threat to the woman and her offspring in the past? Remember, nature doesn't care about anyone's joy and happiness, it only cares about the survival of the species. Therefore, a large part of the female intuition often happens unconsciously, that is, without specifically invested work in obtaining such information. On the same principle, the average man will be much easier to understand in the field, and allowed, for example, into the forest will be easier to navigate in it without putting too much energy into it. Evolutionary biology is bowing to us again.